The role of the company secretary in increasing the effectiveness of non-executive directors. The role of the company secretary is evolving. The role is not clearly defined. Company secretaries who are proactive and take the initiative can shape the role so that it really suits them. Well, to some degree, of course. In our previous podcasts with Caroline Ferguson and Lauren Wolfson, we talked already about the role company secretaries can play in helping a board to become more effective and fit for the future. In this podcast, we zoom in on what company secretaries can do to help non-executive directors to become more effective. Welcome to the Better Boards podcast series. In this episode, I'm delighted to talk with John Mills about the role of the company secretary in increasing the effectiveness of non-executive directors. I'm Dr. Sabine Dembkowski, founder and managing partner of Better Boards. We make the boards of the most ambitious organizations more effective. Our mission at Better Boards is to contribute to creating better boards. We do this by providing clients with an evidence-based approach for board evaluations and board development programs. To fulfill our mission, we give a voice to all who care about creating better boards. John, thank you so much for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
Thank you for inviting me. It's nice to be here.
So our topic today is the role of the company secretary. And a lot has been written and the role has evolved. What role do company secretaries, in your experience, play in creating more effective boards?
Well, I think what's both good and bad about the role of a company secretary is that because it has evolved so much over the last 20 years or so, it isn't that well defined and its boundaries can be quite fluid. I think at its heart, for me, it's about enabling effective governance at the top of the organisation. And that starts with ensuring that boards are well briefed, well prepared as regards their responsibilities, and that the administrative aspects surrounding meetings run smoothly. And that's the timeliness and the accuracy of papers, meetings and agendas planned and agreed well in advance and so forth. But I suppose the thing is, it wouldn't be much of a job if that was all there was to the role. I think the best boards have a good mix of skills, experience and backgrounds, and the right balance of being both challenging and supportive to management, inside and outside the boardroom. I think once the non-execs are in place, company secretaries can play a role in identifying candidates to help fill any gaps and help the directors themselves get up to speed on areas where they're less familiar, either as regards the business itself or the practices and processes of that board and its committees.
Can you elaborate on this a bit? So what is it that you believe company secretaries could do maybe better or more of to create really more effective boards?
Well, I suppose partly it depends what you mean by an effective board. And I was looking at the FRC guidance, which was issued in 2018, because that had a lot to say on this subject, of course. And that talked about an effective board defining the corporate purpose and setting a strategy to deliver it. And that strategy is underpinned by the values and behaviours that shape the organisation's culture and the way it conducts its business. And I think effective directors understand their duties both collectively and individually, and they act in a manner that's consistent with those duties and uphold the highest standards of integrity. I think they should support the chair in instilling the appropriate values, behaviours and cultures in the boardroom and beyond. I think effective chairs create an open and inclusive environment, and effective executives provide timely and clear information to the board and understand and respect its role. I suppose it's important to remember, though, that boards are about more than just what happens during, what can be a bit sort of choreographed board meetings themselves. Given the opportunity and the will to get involved, company secretaries can be a useful medium for chairs and non-execs to learn more about the organisation and its culture, as well as supporting the board in terms of its administration.
Let us zoom in on this, because when I'm talking with company secretaries, there is sometimes the hesitancy to step in, to reach out to non-executive directors. Where is really the balance between this administrative side? And then I see some company secretaries who really have shaped their role so much that they are a confident, a real board advisor.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point because I think, again, to some extent, it goes back to what we were saying about company secretaries' roles not being that well defined. So you can sort of make it what you want. And some people will see it as more of an administrative role. And other people will want to get much more involved in the governance and the broader sort of business of the organization that they're working. And I think some of that then is sort of down to personality, but it's also down to being given the opportunity to grow and develop the role by the chair, by the executive directors, by the non-executive directors.
So let's maybe zoom in specifically on the role a company secretary can play by really helping non-executive directors to become more effective, to make the most of their role on the board.
Right. Well, I mean, I think company secretaries, because of that role, they tend to know people across the group at various levels. So even if they can't give you an answer themselves, they could probably put you in touch with the right people who could give you that answer. And they can arrange meetings for you or briefings for you on pretty much any subject you want, either on the record or off the record, and tell you what's really happening in that organization. And I think non-execs should make much better use of a good, engaged company secretary. And I would encourage non-execs to think about how they can do that, how they can get the best out of their company secretaries. And don't forget, except in, in some companies, there is just the company secretary in a role on their own. But often there's a team, a company secretarial team, and
Yes.
do get involved and do get to know those people. I think if I were a non-exec, especially sort of post-Carillion and other corporate failures, I'd want to know what's really going on in the company I'm responsible for. And the company secretary is probably better placed to do that for you, especially if the role is standalone, than anybody else.
So all non-executive directors who are listening to this podcast, reach out to company secretaries and think how you can use them even better. Can you maybe give some examples, John? What could non-executive directors ask for? What are the things that the company secretary can really, really do for them?
There's both the practices and processes that are taking place in the boardroom itself and the interaction of the various directors, both within the board and also, with the rest of the organization. And then there's the broader sort of organization which you're part of. Because company secretaries, spend time working with chairs and executives on producing agendas and so forth for meetings, they will tend to know what's going on in an organization. So if you're a non-exec and there's something that isn't clear about the organization that you're working for example, you're less familiar with part of the business, ask the company secretary to put you in touch with, the people who can brief you on that, or arrange a visit for you to a site, or ask them to put you in front of a group of employees at a different site or at a different level to the level that you would normally come across. So I think one of the problems with being a non-exec must be that you can end up getting your information from a very small group of people, a very small group of senior executives. But really, what you want to do, I think, is you want to know what's going on at all levels in that organization, and if possible, away from the head office. You don't want to just have all your perception of a company based on what you see and hear within sort of 20 feet of the boardroom.
I think that's a very important point, and that is a point that I hear so often at the moment because of the time we had with social distancing and all the restrictions brought on all of us due to COVID-19. I think non-executive directors didn't have a chance to really see what's going on in organizations because we all were sitting in Zoom calls. So I think it's a very important point you're making. I think getting in touch again with the organizations everyone is serving, the message you just sent comes very, very timely.
What has happened over the last year is we have learned different ways of communicating. People have got a lot more sort of familiar with Zoom and team calls and so forth. And that is a way to reach maybe a broader group of people in a broader range of sites. So places that you might not have the time to get to if your organization is sort of far reaching. But the more sort of social interactions you get with people, even if you're just going up in the lift, to the meeting, or you're walking into the building, or you're getting a cup of coffee, or you're getting your lunch, those sort of interactions that a non-exec can get with a broader group of employees, I think are invaluable, because you do want to know really what's sort of making that organization tick and what people think about it.
So, a lot of company secretaries, even if they're teams, they quite often, they have a lot on their plate. they're quite often under-resourced. Is it realistic? Do NEDs need to feel bad about reaching out? Is it realistic that company secretaries can do what you describe?
Well, I think it's certainly easier to say to have the situation that I've described if you're in a big company. If you are a one-person band as a company secretary, then it is harder. So I think non-execs should respect and appreciate that the company secretaries have a busy day job, of which dealing with the board is a major part and a vital part, but it's not the sole part. And like everybody else, they have families and social lives that they want to sort of spend time with. So I think it is about sort of getting that balance and making sure that your style of interaction, if you're a non-exec, works for the company secretary as well as it works for you.
So I would think this depends also then a lot on the relationship a company secretary has with each of the non-executive directors. What can they really do to nurture and develop these relationships?
I could say it's like any sort of business relationship. And like I said, work out what sort of works for the two of you. I mean, some non-execs will be well supported because there'll be executives at other companies, with a PA or a team to support them, or they're very experienced non-execs and are more sort of comfortable with their own sort of style in a boardroom and how they interact with the boards that they're on. But other people, I suppose, are sort of newer to the role and maybe sort of need more support. For non-execs, be aware of the position that the company secretary is in. I mean, they might just sort of sit there quietly in the corner taking minutes, but there is more to their job than that. So if you can use them, but don't overburden them.
It also means don't be too timid on both sides. Reach out to each other, get to know each other, and start really using each other as a resource.
Yes, and I think company secretaries, I suppose, are often the most junior person in the room if they're in a boardroom. And I think a lot of us aren't necessarily the most sort of salesy people. We're not particularly perhaps good at sort of pushing ourselves to the forefront as other people in other professions might be. But that doesn't mean that we don't have something to contribute, and it doesn't mean that we don't know what we're on about, and it doesn't mean that we can sort of add value and have an opinion on things.
So a lot of encouragement here for company secretaries. What are the 3 things that our listeners should take away from this podcast?
I think if you're a chair or a committee chair, use the company secretary as a bridge between you and the executives and the broader employee base. And do involve them early and work with them to plan meetings and agendas for the year and talk about what's important with the area that you're sort of dealing with. And most importantly, I suppose, seek their advice on governance. And don't forget that a company secretary, particularly of a PLC, has to be highly qualified, and they'll have spent a lot of time in boardrooms from an early stage of their career. So do use that experience to help you. I think if you're a non-exec, make sure the secretary plans a good induction for you when you join a board and that it's kept up to date throughout your tenure, because you can always learn and there'll always be new things in the company that you should be aware of. So use them to find out what's going on in the company that you don't see and ask them for advice, clarification and feedback. And that is what we're there for. And I think if you're a company secretary, going back to some of what we said about not being forthright people in perhaps sort of putting ourselves forward, do put your hand up and offer to help chair and non-execs. Do get involved in the broader aspects of governance, because for me, that makes the role more interesting. But do also make sure you get the basics right.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, John, for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
How can we help you and your board to become more effective? We at Better Boards are always delighted to hear from you. Get in touch. You can best reach us on info@better-boards.com. Thank you for listening.